tell me, before we get started, what I really want to explore today is the classic innovator's dilemma. And there's lots of examples of this that are sort of hindsight is 2020. Things like Kodak not being in the sharing memories business, but rather thinking it was in the film business, and not noticing the fact that everybody who wants a picture needs an internet connection attached to it so they can share it with friends. That's obvious today when we're all carrying smartphones in our pockets. It wasn't that obvious 20 years ago when Kodak was busy trying to get higher ISO film. And many of the examples we have of this sort of sustaining versus disruptive or adjacent innovation are things that they're obvious afterwards. You said something the other day when we were talking about Breather, and I think it's a very good example of the innovator's dilemma while it happens. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can start out by telling us a little about Breather and what it does, and then we'll talk about how you're changing the market and the difference between cannibalizing an existing market and creating new customers.
Absolutely. I mean, I read Clayton Christensen is sort of classic literature for me in that sense. It really clarified all of this thinking that I had around why what I was doing was working. I had my own thinking about why that was, but this is so great. So first I'll begin by talking about what it is that we do at Breather. So Breather is a distributed network of rooms or offices that you can unlock with your phone at any time. So in essence, imagine yourself in a city you don't live in, like let's say you are going to New York for a few days. You always have this sort of empty time where you would like to have Wi-Fi, or maybe you need to have a meeting, or you just would like to be by yourself so you can have a phone call that's not inside Starbucks. So it's taken for granted that you only have two private spaces in your whole world, which is your office and your house, and everything else belongs to the public, and as such is sort of degraded by the tragedy of the commons. So we created an in-between space, which it's not that in and of itself is not really hard. It's just electronic locks came onto the market, and so we allow you to open a set of these electronic locks with your phone. So you can get a private office anywhere you want, basically all over the world eventually. Now we have them in New York, we're starting in San Francisco, and we have them up in Canada, where you and I are here.
All right, and what do you find about the people that are using it? What kinds of people are using Breather?
So that is exactly the right question, because fundamentally what we sell is office space. So office space is, if I were to say to you on my website, breather.com, I would say, I have office space, would you like to buy it? Nobody would care, and it would not work. So we don't do that. And it's not, that positioning was deliberately designed because when we started the company, we didn't want office space either. What we wanted is a private space that felt like it was ours. So we designed it with sort of a positioning of peace and quiet on demand. And as a result of that positioning, some people do come to us and they are traditional office people. So they use Breather to augment their office. So let's say they work downtown, but they got to go uptown or they got to go somewhere else. They'll use Breather in the interim for phone calls, for Wi-Fi, for whatever. It's also a really good quality place to just sort of wind down or whatever. But the real magic is in the emergent use cases that have come up and that no other company in my vertical can really capture. So there's a huge public company called Regus. And Regus is $3 billion, and they sell office space in a distributed way, kind of the same way that we do. Except with Regus, they sell it to large corporations. What I do is I sell office space to people that do not currently need office space, and I succeed. I do it by positioning it as peace and quiet on demand. So, last night, we get a lot of testimonials, a lot. And one of the testimonials, last night, anecdotally, is a bunch of theater students who are all like, oh my God, we run a theater company. There's no office space that fits our needs, ever. And we used Breather last night, and it was the most productive thing that we'd ever done in our life. It was so great. We have no office space that fits what we need to do, and so these people come out and they use it. And so, but there's more. But wait, there's more. There's hundreds of these use cases that we deliberately kind of went after, not even knowing what they are, by thinking of our company as being not a space where office dwellers go, but a space where anyone could feel comfortable going. And so we had to design a whole space around that. But the result is basically the equivalent to that Twitter box. The Twitter box doesn't say, type in your lunch here. It types in, it says, what is it that you, just type whatever you want. This is the box. And if they said type your lunch in here, nobody would go. But if they say instead, just write whatever you want, it creates, revolutions throughout the Middle East and affects political campaigns and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
if I understand what you're saying, the challenge is to pick a market that's focused enough that you can explain who you are, but not so focused that you know who it's for yet.
The way you're absolutely right. The way that I would say it is I would say, think of a vertical, or think of an industry where you do not currently purchase the thing that exists, and then find a way that you would be interested in it. So in our case, I traveled all over the world because I was a writer for several years. I wrote business books, and I would be wandering around cities like, where am I going? Where am I going? Literally Starbucks, 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 Starbucks. So I was like, why? It seems weird, but that I would presume that I should have access to private space, but it's just something that I believed in. So in our case, I would buy my own office space, but I would never buy Regus, and I would never buy a day worth of co-working space. What I need is a simple, elegant solution that goes through my phone where I don't have to talk to anyone.
Why wouldn't you use co-working space? I know they rent desks by the day. Why wouldn't you do that?
Sure. So that's a great question. The answer is I'm not entirely sure why our users don't do that, but I can tell you that our users want a closed room. And the reason they want a closed room is because so many other things can be done inside a closed room, including private clothing sales, including naps, including doctor's visits, including meditation classes. It just goes on and on and on. The closed door allows for all those things to happen. So we just believed that a desk was not the right solution. A room was the right solution.
And in some ways, you're talking about product market fit here, that you're saying there's this sort of nebulous, turns out a door dramatically expands your market. Yeah,
and so we start to think about the physical object as a platform. Everyone in technology is always talking about building a platform. A room is a platform, and real estate is a platform. It's just a platform that is so fundamental and basic and real that it's not conceived of as being technology at all. So we think about it and we go, well, we're going to make this into a technology product by allowing technology to access it in an on-demand, simple way. Like we're like AWS for space.
Well, all you've done is you've removed a piece of the incredibly frictional part of a piece, which was getting a key, right? And so once you've removed the friction from one part of the equation, that piece that lets you get a key, you then start to play with, like, it's easier to deal with stuff in 1 hour increments. It's easier to have it scattered all around the city. They don't do centralization and so on. One of the things that always intrigues me is that when you see people who start up, and Amazon, you just mentioned AWS. AWS is a great example. In the original Innovator's Dilemma, Christensen uses the example of hard drives, right? So the 8-inch hard drive, all those manufacturers thought that the 5.25-inch hard drive was a stupid place to go because their customers told them, we want bigger, faster, higher storage density, more megabytes per, all that stuff. Turns out 5.25 was not good at any of those, so none of their customers would ask for it, but it was really good for desktop computers. And I always look at, you look at Blockbuster. Blockbuster wasn't Netflix because it framed the problem of what business it was in as we are in the video store ownership and late fee collection business. Mm-hmm. They didn't know they were calling it that, but they were calling it that. Netflix said, well, we're in the entertainment delivery business, right? And Netflix, sort of realizing this, has now become, we're in the entertainment creation business, and they've moved into other stuff.
Well, they had to move down the stack.
Sure. And this is, I think part of what a lot of organizations do is you capture a market and you turn it into a utility, right? So AWS got a certain set of features and then quickly turned it into a utility. You guys have introduced the sort of this room platform as a utility. Tell me why someone like a Regus or another big realtor that has surplus space would never conceive of this, or why you don't think they've gotten into it.
That's a great question. It's great because this is exactly Innovator's dilemma. So the Innovator's, it's actually Innovator's solution, I think, where Christensen talks about it, And what he says is by the very definition of their business model, they cannot go down markets to compete against the people down here. One, it's not worth it for them. Two, it will actually screw with their business model at the top. So I'll give you the example of a traditional business center. A traditional business center gets companies, what's the top 5 consulting companies in the world? You got Accenture,
KPMG, those guys.
KPMG. They survive, and then you got the banks like Credit Suisse, and you've got Citibank and all these other ones. So they survive by having worldwide offices that are professional, where those people that work at huge corporations can go and get the things that they need. They do not survive off of an individual saying, I want to use this. And in fact, the individual who wants to use this can't get in. Because if they let in anyone else, then the people inside the giant corporations would say, I'm not comfortable with these individuals coming in here.
You don't want to have your board meeting while there's someone doing yoga next door.
One person going, hey, what's up? Is this my room? So they cannot capture the people at the bottom of the market. So one of the other examples in Clayton Christensen, as you talked about, something like that, like iron rods or aluminum rods. And he's talking about how they start with the scraps. And from the scraps and the ability to sort of profit from scraps, they're able to go up market. But the guys down up at the top would never come down here. So what happens is an individual a company can scrap its way up market. But these people at the top have no choice but to move up market to deal with that. So you can use, again, Android and Apple is a good example of this. iOS has the top of the market. And since Android is coming in as a low-end competitor, iOS has no choice. They're not going down. They have to go up. They're going to go up market to a new disruptive thing with high margins. That's why they keep going to stay competitive. And meanwhile, Android is creeping up, going, we're just going to keep capturing that. And you can see that in every industry. So to bring it back to our thing, we get the theater students, we get the meditation teachers, we get the people who want to use Wi-Fi for an hour, blah, 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 blah. We get 1,000 use cases like that Regis or any other office company cannot get and doesn't want. And as a result, we can aggregate those people and create a market out of that, and then we can sort of head upstream. And
so Starbucks is a much bigger competitor for you than Regis.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's an interesting point, that you also have unusual exit strategies. If Starbucks was paying attention to the innovator's dilemma, maybe they'd say we need to get into the transient 1 hour electronically unlocked space for use.
That's also possible, but I would argue that it is also against their business model.
Why?
Because I've thought a lot about this. I could be wrong about this one, but the way that I think about it is their business ideally would be, you come into the coffee shop and you get out in 5 seconds. Yeah. They are disincentivized by keeping people inside of a space. And in fact, the space is they consider themselves a real estate company, actually.
Right.
So they own and aggregate a ton of real estate, and it's super valuable because Starbucks is an entrant into it. So, but in reality, they could just have the stalls at this point. If they could electronically, with a machine, provide Starbucks coffee to millions and millions and millions, they would. Whereas in our case, we compete on the quality of the space and the stuff that the space itself brings. So in theory, we can actually exist in parallel. It's just people are satisficing. They're grabbing Starbucks because they have no other choice. They want to sit down.
Can you explain satisficing?
Satisficing is like a customer going into and trying to purchase something, trying to get a job done. And they're saying, well, I don't really have the option that I want, so I'm going to do the best available thing. It's like somebody using an old sock as a dog toy or something. Right. They're saying, well, this will do the job for now.
It's the good enough. And I think I saw somewhere there was a post about technology and innovation, and in order to significantly change a market, you need to have a solution that's 10 times better. And the guy's theory was, unless something's 3 times better, I'm not going to regard my current solution as inadequate. And then unless the solution from the range of solutions is 3 times better than competitors, I'm not going to choose it. And so you need 3 times 3 is 9. He said 10 times better. But I kind of think it's interesting. You have to think of the delta between the satisfactory solution with which people are satisficing and your peers. So when Gmail came out, it had to be 100 megs of storage, or a gig of storage. And a gig was better than 100 megs because everyone else was 10 megs. If they just said 100 megs, it wouldn't have done much. When you get to a gig, all of a sudden, 2 orders of magnitude, and people are selling their accounts on eBay. So there's a certain amount of significantly better than. How do you guys communicate that significantly better than? Obviously, partly branding, but what's the thing that gets people to say, maybe I will use you instead of Starbucks or whatever?
Yeah, it's always like when you're running a startup, everything is an uphill battle. But I would say that the main thing that we focus on is just ensuring that the space itself is 10 times better. So it is every startup has an aha moment, and the aha moment with Uber, for example, would be when that black car shows up, and you're like, and you come in, and they're like, Julien, and you're like, yeah, I am a rock star. This is amazing. So it's that's the aha moment for Uber. So we have an aha moment, which is when the user first opens the door and they realize that they've basically bought a space hour, and they go, I've never been by myself in the day before with an ability to take my shoes off and just use Wi-Fi and not worry about anything. They literally cannot buy that on the market at all.
Right.
So we focus on getting users into rooms, and then when the user is in the room, the word of mouth just starts to explode. Like, we create a really nice space also, so we're really careful about what a space would look like.
Yeah, I used the space with Austin in Montreal, and you get this feeling of, like, I wish my living room was this cool. Like, it's got to feel, like, aspirational almost.
Yeah.
How much time do you guys put into that, designing that experience?
Right now, we put a lot of time into it. My co-founder comes from retail, and she spent a lot of time thinking about space and making it. And so we have like a style that eventually becomes a marketplace where it's just aggregated other kinds of space that come into it. That's starting to happen now. There's enough press sort of bubbling up and enough users bubbling up that it's flipping. And now real estate people are coming to see us and saying, hey, how can I get my space on this platform?
That's awesome. So we talked a little about the fact that the electronic locks were, pun intended, the thing that unlocked this model. It seems to me like a lot of these companies are standing on the shoulders of giants, and there's this inflection point. You mentioned Uber earlier. Uber wouldn't work in London until you had Google Maps.
Right.
Because before that, you literally had to have the knowledge, right? You had to have the map of how to get from point A to point B in an incredibly complicated, thousands-year-old city with ancient maps and Roman aqueducts. And all of a sudden now the barrier to entry as a taxi driver in London is vanishingly small. Yeah. It seems to me like we've outlined a few of the things that big companies have to think about. One is probably, how to go down market without cannibalizing your existing business, or how to start anew. One is how to reframe the business you're in to recognize the change. One is what foundational technologies enable new business models that probably aren't on your radar screen. How do you, if you were an executive, let's imagine you ran a big real estate space and you saw an article about Breather. How would you try to react in a large organization?
I think the first thing would be, this is pretty simple, lean startup. Like Eric Ries would say, create a disruptive organization inside your own company that attempts to kill you, right? And to return to Steve Jobs quotes, which are always helpful in these sorts of things, he would say, if we don't cannibalize ourselves, someone else will. So in reality, it's just like, I view the way that all things, like the state of every company eventually is, on a long enough timeline, is dead, right? So you could, like Fight Club quotes applied to companies. And you could take that and you could say, okay, so we're going to eventually die. Like, how is that going to happen? You could literally think that. How are we going to be destroyed? We're going to die. How is that going to happen? You can apply that to a person too. Well, I guess I'm smoking, so that's probably, okay, I should get rid of that. So that's how I view it. I don't believe that companies can go down market because their efficiencies, this is, again, I'm just drawing from Christensen, their efficiencies are, and the way that they operate, the people that they hire, everything is all built into a mechanism designed to absorb profit from a specific thing. And if they shift over, they lose the efficiencies over here. which means they're less competitive in their main market. They can't do that because they'll lose market share. So they have to instead go over to the other side and say, hey, you go and create this. And that's what Intuit did, and that's what any number of other players did. So they can't really go down market. They have to say, we're going to attempt to create something that would previously that would cannibalize or destroy our sales or our industry, and be genuine and honest about it. And I think about that all the time. Even though I'm a startup, I know that I'm leading in a small growing market, and I go, how would a company destroy what we do? How would an emergent competitor compete with us? And you have to ask yourself that. You don't have a choice.
How do you balance, as an executive, that paranoia with the sort of optimism that you need? You know, if you get up in the morning and say, we will all be dead one day, your employees quit. So how do you balance those two worlds, right? You got to be healthfully pessimistic. You have this paradox of optimism and pessimism. How do you balance those two?
I don't know. I think I have a pretty natural tendency, personality-wise, to do that. I don't know how you make yourself do that, but I mean, I just view everything as a set of as creative destruction, right? Like capitalism relies on industries being crushed and replaced by something new. That's just what it does. That's what the whole system is doing, and the magic of the fact that it makes people money is that it convinces really selfish people to go out and do something that's largely good for humanity. You know what I mean? Like the billionaires go out and they're like, yeah, I'm going to become a billionaire. Oh, and I'm also going to provide a computer for every desktop. You know? So, I don't know, the way that I always think about it and go, this is going to become massive, and then eventually it'll become the status quo, and there won't be a way to grow anymore. But there's so much growth that can occur, and you just start realizing, like, the world is full of cash and full of ways to mess with the existing reality and to make something new. And in our case,
there are some companies that have sort of overcome this. I was talking to someone from GE, and he pointed out to me the logo of the GE, which is this circle with the three swirling kind of, looks like little commas. So GE got its start making light bulbs, then the generators to power those light bulbs, and then it turns out if you turn a generator around, it's an electric motor. And then it turns out that electric motors spin really fast and vibrate, and so do MRIs and wind turbines and so on. And you look at everything they do, they're like, we're really good at things that spin fast and must not vibrate.
Yeah.
Like, that's a pretty broadly framed statement, but that's what an MRI, a wind turbine, and a train engine and a generator have in common. So it seems to me like if you frame your business broadly enough to say, we are in the business of space, then you could say we're in the business of 5-year contract space, we're in the business of monthly regional sales space, and we're in the business of hourly rental space, and we're in the business of auditorium and event space and screening space and so on. You could experiment within that market and keep them separate. GE seems to do that pretty well. They make home light bulbs, and they make the thing that powers the train that goes down the tracks. But when you frame yourself that broadly, you probably lose the discipline you need to find those efficiencies of profit you talked about. So, any ideas why do you think GE's been able to do it? What do they do differently?
I don't know. I don't know much about that sort of Jack Welch mythology that everyone where they believe that he's an amazing CEO, all these things, but like. I would say I'm a big believer, as you are probably, in the founder and how the founder and his original energy, some of the founders, will go in and they'll create something because they built it, but they also have this sort of dynamo inside of them that makes them continuously think about what if. So, and yet those CEOs are not the CEOs that create the greatest efficiencies, So it's almost like there needs to be this, summer court, winter court flip, where it's like winter court is like when everything dies, right. And then it's like that goes back to Tim O'Reilly and how he would say create more value than you capture, and how there are two cycles: the cycles of creation and then the cycle of absorbing that profit after you have created a market.
Sounds very yin and yang.
It's super yin and yang, yeah. So you can get really cliched talking about it, but it makes a lot of sense to me. And I mean, I just think that it probably requires two different types of people.
Sure. I want to end with this question on sort of tectonic shifts. One of the challenges, I think, to know when you move from a cycle of creation to a cycle of absorption is when you see a shift in the market that affects you. So ubiquitous mobile devices is a shift in the market that if you can anticipate it, then you're Kodak and you still survive, right? Streaming broadband is a shift that if you can anticipate it, as Netflix does, then you survive. In your case, the act of ubiquitous Wi-Fi. I remember the first time I saw a movie that had a URL in the trailer, and I was like, oh, that means something. And then a few years later, there's a hashtag in the trailer, and I'm like, oh, that really means something. The idea of ubiquitous Wi-Fi, that everybody can, if you're in a downtown core, you can find data on your phone, and then you can go use Wi-Fi to unlock a room. Obviously, the electronic locks that you talked about, the rise of the web worker as someone who has this sort of transient job, the idea that we no longer work for a company for 60 years, but rather for short bursts. The idea that web technologies have made it possible for a yoga instructor to run sort of on-demand classes because the friction, you no longer seem to sign up to the yoga instructor for the year. Each of those is like a little tiny shift. Mm-hmm. And in the aggregate, they make what you guys do possible. But it's very hard to see those the 1,000 cuts that are going to kill the incumbent and define them as a mortal wound.
Sure.
How do you think organizations should look at that? Because that's a real, how do you see that sort of coming shift that tells you it's time to be creative or time to destroy the existing business?
Even before I talked about and had a startup, I talked about venture capital and the top people in that industry and how they thought about disruption and destruction of industries. And you can look at the top people like that, and they'll say things like, oh, look towards hobbyists, And if you look towards hobbyists, you'll find things like 3D printing, which normally you would reject. But I think you and I, Alistair, can largely agree that maybe not 5 years from now, maybe not 10 years from now, but at some point, Home Depot is going to be a giant fucking room with a huge 3D printer in the back, just saying, what do you want? Huh. What do you want? Huh. And just handing those things to those people. It doesn't require a giant thing anymore.
And maybe it'll be called Kinko's, not Home Depot.
Yeah, that's right. That's a very good point. So maybe it'll be Kinko's. So that's the kind of thing that you have to think about. Another way that I like to think about it is I like to think about it as what is being made fun of right now. And I like to think of society as naturally self-protective. And since it's self-protective, if something disruptive comes into it, it's going to be ridiculed. And you can see that over and over and over again. Snapchat, Twitter, Kickstarter, eBay. It could just go on and on. And as a matter of fact, I hate to say it, but I have a great example of that, which is that everyone thinks their first instinct when they think about Breather is, my God, people are going to have sex there. And so the result of that is it's actually a protective barrier between me and competitors because most people can't handle the idea of creating a company where people might have sex. Whereas I go, well, I know that that's a perception issue, not a reality issue. And I know that when something can be made fun of, it's actually a signal that you should be going forward.
It's interesting. Ridicule is a barrier to entry for companies that have something to lose. I heard this apocryphal story that when PayPal went live, it was only legal in 48 out of 50 states. And that as a result, Amex and MasterCard and Visa, who had a lot to lose, could not enter the market because they were also not approved. And PayPal said, screw it, we're just going to go into the market. I met a guy at the Lean Startup Conference who told me the number was actually 17 states. Because I'd always heard this apocryphal story, and he was part of it at Visa. And he said, so, they literally went in, and they were like, well, if we get shut down, we lose $10 million.
Yeah.
If Visa is found to be going live without being compliant in all states for online transactions, they lose billions, right? They get shut down in states. Yeah. And so this idea of ridicule is a huge barrier to entry. Austin Hill, with whom I had my first Breather experience, Austin was telling, I remember the days of Zero Knowledge when they had this sort of end-to-end encrypted platform for conversations and transactions and so on. And everyone said, oh, it'll just be used by criminals and pedophiles and drug dealers, right? And lo and behold, here's WhatsApp getting bought for $19 billion, and look, it's encrypted end-to-end, right? So I think the ridicule as a barrier to entry is a really good one. The challenge, of course, is that in an organization that thrives on politics, a big company, if you're the person that advocates the things that are widely ridiculed, that's horrible for your lifespan of that company.
That's right, exactly.
So we almost need the court jester, the fool whose job it is to speak truth to the king by talking nonsense that turns out it's really valuable, right?
Maybe, yeah. And you have to remember that naturally, only 50% of the time are you going to be in the winning scenario. That's just reality.
Maybe less than 50, yeah.
Sometimes you're going to die, and your company's going to die, and it's not going to work out for you, and somebody else will have done it better than you. So that's okay. Again, what creates profit and growth and it creates a middle class even are things that destroy industries and allow new things to emerge for free or what have you.
Interesting. It's the counter argument to the sort of hollowing out of the middle class is that we ridicule a lot of things these days. So
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, DHL had a very interesting take on this. They said, I talked to them last summer, and they said we don't actually say we're going to go start a 3D printing company. They say we're going to do a study on 3D printing, and then the company goes, yeah, you can have some money for that. And then they go and start a 3D printing company, for example, and they find out that it doesn't work. They come back and go, great news, our study was successful, we should not enter the 3D printing market. Or, great news, our study was successful, we should enter, and by the way, we accidentally created a startup. That's subject to much less ridicule than, hey, I want to start a company. So I think there are some interesting hacks for how to socialize this stuff within a company without looking like a fool.
You know this story, this comes from New York Times or something, where they're talking about like building or creating a tunnel through a mountain, and if they had begun with knowing all the challenges that they would have to deal with, they would never have begun at all. But the complexities of it over time are approachable, so you only have one panic attack each week versus having all the panic attacks at the beginning, so you would never do it at all. That's what happens when you start a company that's attempting to do disruptive things, is you're going, oh my God, like the PayPal thing is such a great example because Peter Thiel and the rest of that crew had a really strong understanding of risk, and Elon Musk has an incredible understanding of risk, right? Where he's going, we're going to figure it out. I just don't know how, but we got a bunch of smart people, so we're going to figure it out. So that's kind of the way that you have to think about it. And large companies can't do that. They have to do a great deal of analysis. We just don't have that luxury.
Right. Cool. Thank you very much. Very interesting. Any closing thoughts?
Thanks for having me. Remember, the next thing that happens in your industry that could be disruptive is probably a thing you will laugh at and reject.
All right. Good rules to live by. Thanks, Julien.